We live in a world our ancestors would barely recognize. Around the globe, the impact of human ingenuity is now everywhere. We've pushed back the limits of our planet at speeds, depths, and heights that would have left our forebears breathless. Driving all these achievements is humankind's extraordinary gift for invention. Through genius and inspiration, we've created exceptional solutions to complex problems. From the everyday to the spectacular, some good and some not so good. This series celebrates the million ways our great inventions have transformed our world.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
What is the connection between the California gold rush, ripped pockets, and the color blue? Think of a great invention that you use maybe every single day. For work, for play, for convenience.
They sort of have this essence of coolness about them.
Classless, ageless, adaptable, everywhere. A modern phenomenon. Soon to reach 2 billion units sold every year. We think they're all American, but as we'll reveal, they would never have been invented without the ingenuity of Europeans.
They have expression, modesty, sex appeal, and simplicity.
They became synonymous with real-life cowboys, and then movie cowboys.
They look great, they're sturdy, they can last a very long time.
But there's a darker side to the story. At a time when we're learning to put the planet first.
This is a fashion that's not going away anytime soon. So if we can think about sustainability, that's going to matter.
Can we move fast enough and change the manufacturing habits of a lifetime? Will we ever fall out of love with blue denim jeans? Jeans are the casual, cool statement that millions of people globally choose to make every day. The biggest market in revenue terms is North America, followed by China. But experts report that sales are up across the world, from the Asia-Pacific region to South America to Europe. All this contributes to a global market worth billions of dollars and predicted to rise. Recent statistics suggest that the average American has 7 pairs of jeans in their closet. And that average American buys 4 new pairs every year.
How many pairs of jeans do I have? I must have about 30 pairs of jeans. That sounds like a lot.
At a guess, I would say that I've got about 30 pairs of jeans.
I do wear jeans, yeah, I've got 2 pairs.
Why have jeans endured in such an unpredictable industry as fashion, when most other great ideas fall by the wayside after just a few seasons? Designers are driven to invent new fabrics, new looks, new fiber combinations. Once human beings started inventing clothing, we were on the long road to the invention of jeans. For millennia, clothing had been made out of easily accessible materials like animal skins and fur, probably born out of a basic necessity to keep warm. We developed cutting tools and rudimentary needles, which meant we could cut hides into even shapes that could be sewn together and decorated. We experimented with wool and plant fibers, like cotton. From these, we made thread and invented ways of weaving. This tarkan dress from ancient Egypt is the oldest known woven piece of clothing. It's over 5,000 years old and made of linen. Its beautiful details like tailored sleeves, narrow pleats, and a V-neck demonstrate an early sense of fashion.
People have always wanted to dress up, and clothes have always been meaningful. And there has, in that sense, always been fashion. There's always been a desire to have what is nice and new and is going to be imitated.
To imitate, we had to make copies of a garment if it proved popular, so we invented new tools to speed up processes. We developed implements to card or comb the wool or cotton to separate it, ready for spinning. Then, over 1,000 years ago, we invented the spinning wheel. This one is a contemporary copy. And we discovered that silk, cotton, and wool could be spun to make yarn. This image shows the world's oldest trousers, pieced together from remnants found buried in Western China. Dating back 3,000 years, they're woven in wool, and German archaeologists think they were a uniform worn by warriors for horse riding. Once again, the sophisticated decorative embroidery detail gives us an insight into early fashion. It's always been the rich who've had the means to follow fashion, but poor working people and peasants would wear the same simple clothes all their lives, even though their clothes were barely fit for purpose.
The pre-industrial world is a world in which the poor are always ragged, in which clothing is always hard to get hold of.
Weavers the world over worked on new, stronger fabrics that could be made more efficiently. Cotton textiles were particularly successful. Cotton grows easily and in abundance, producing strong, reliable yarn, which would eventually end up in denim jeans.
I think denim has been so successful because it's made out of cotton, and cotton is this ubiquitous fabric that we discovered can be used to make clothes.
To produce cotton fabric in larger quantities, inventors began tackling every part of the production process. Consequently, progress in textile manufacturing took leaps during the Industrial Revolution. First came the invention of a more efficient way to spin cotton into yarn. British weaver James Hargreaves invented his spinning jenny in 1764, when this one, demonstrated recently, was made. By turning a single wheel, 8 spindles would simultaneously spin cotton or wool, instead of one on conventional spinning wheels.
The second half of the 18th century sees the development of industrial production of yarn, the spinning jenny, and a whole series of other innovations that enable them to turn cotton into a thread quickly and on scale. And that's transformative because what that enables them to do is to industrialize the production of thread, which then enables them to produce cotton goods much more cheaply.
The spinning jenny led to the invention of mechanical weaving looms. These ultimately created more durable clothes that were cheaper than before.
From industrialization onwards, the poor are still ill-dressed, the poor are still struggling, but they are now shod and clothed in a way that they weren't before. And it's the beginning of the process that yields the incredibly cheap clothing of the modern day.
Today, mass-produced clothing is the norm. But in the 18th century, every stage of production was open to improvement and invention.
So in this time, the Industrial Revolution, it was a great time for innovation and coming up with ways of doing the jobs that people used to do in much more efficient ways. So spinning jenny is a fantastic example of that, where you're able to do what, one person might have been doing or one machine might have been doing, and kind of replicating that 8 times over on the same device, essentially.
As industrialization spread, new improved textiles were created for many applications, not just clothes. Northwestern Italy was one such area of production, centered around the port of Genoa. It was already a hub for the trade in raw cotton, which supplied local weavers. For centuries, there had been a market for strong, durable sailcloth, to supply trading ships and navies.
They are having to produce not least sailcloth, which of course is vital for the trade of the age. And so in Genoa, for example, the weavers there become famous for the quality and the endurance of the cloth that they're producing for sails.
Sail fabric had to be tough to withstand the natural forces of wind and rain. Genoese weavers invented a particularly robust cotton corduroy, which became known as jean after Genoa. However, this wasn't yet the denim we know and love. Little did the Italian weavers know that their jean would inspire a French version of cotton twill that would change the world of clothing manufacture forever. 370 kilometers across the Mediterranean Sea, weavers in the southern French city of Nîmes tried to copy the successful, hard-wearing jean fabric from Genoa. But they failed to create a match. Instead, they invented a new cotton twill that is now instantly recognizable. The Nîmes weavers call this fabric serge, and the weave combination of blue and white threads made it different. It appears predominantly blue, but tempered by the white. The weave was copied around the world, but these European roots are fundamental to the story of jeans. The word jean derives from the Italian city of Genoa, and the serge, denim, made in France became denim. So jeans are not the all-American invention you might have thought. Jeans were an unexpected success story, given that fashion trends in fabrics, colors, and cuts are entirely fickle. Thanks to their longevity, factories the world over are now in business, like this one in Pakistan. From mass production to artisan production, like this in a small town in Wales. Pattern cutting is key in every business because it's the cut and fit that set each brand apart from the rest.
Pair of jeans, you've literally got 4 panels. You've got your back pockets, you've got your waistband, your belt loop, your 2 bearers, and your fly. Then you have your pocket linings as well. So there's about 16 pieces go to making a pair of jeans.
Scissors are used for a single layer of fabric or ply, but an electric straight knife cuts through multiple plies in one go. This tool has been used for decades in the jeans industry.
To mass-produce blue jeans, denim is unrolled. Many layers of material are stacked and cut according to different patterns.
In this Pakistani jeans factory, plies of denim are laid out and smoothed before cutting. The straight knife operators work speedily to cut out the pre-marked pattern shapes. The pieces are then taken to the stitching unit, where teams of sewing machine operators stitch them together. The globalization of the product might have surprised its inventors. The invention of jeans is down to 2 unlikely future fashion gurus. One had rivets, the other had some canvas and some cash. Together, they made an enduring piece of fashion magic. Yet their invention was simply about providing hard-wearing clothing for working men. Levi Strauss had sailed to New York City in 1847 to join his family firm in wholesale dry goods. But the potential business opportunities from the gold rush sent him to the west coast of America in San Francisco, where he set up shop, still trading in dry goods like clothing and blankets. 20 years later, he was selling a particularly strong new blue fabric. By now, the French serge denim, denim, was being copied by textile factories elsewhere in Europe and America. Meanwhile, another immigrant, this time from Latvia, had set up shop as a tailor just 500 kilometers away from San Francisco in Reno, Nevada. Jacob Davis bought some of the new blue fabric from Strauss to make workwear. The clientele Davis specifically had in mind were miners, and of all the riskiest possible customers, Californian gold diggers. This film, made in 1954, recreates the Californian gold rush and the excitement at the prospect of instant wealth once that first flake of gold was found.
Gold is discovered in California. The discovery is made at Sutter's Mill, 100 miles from a sleepy little town called San Francisco. Gold is right on the surface. Everyone drops what he is doing to pan the precious metal.
Gold prospectors thronged to California in their thousands in 1848. Such were the power and speed of the rumors of instant riches to be simply dug up from the ground.
The 19th century is characterized by massive mobility, huge numbers of people traveling across the globe, mainly to make their money.
6 months after that first flake of gold was found, there were 4,000 gold miners in California. A year later, there were 80,000. Arriving in 1849, they came to be known as 49ers, coming from as far away as Europe, even China. But digging up a fortune was not guaranteed.
The early prospectors are fortunate. I mean, they'll have a terrible time, but they will actually find what they want. The later prospectors arrive and are often just put to work by the early people.
What became clear was that the gold prospectors' clothes were not fit for purpose. They ended up with ripped pockets, having been filled with the heavy spoils of digging and panning. They needed someone to design work clothes with super strong pockets. Jacob Davis was that someone. In 1871, he hit upon an idea that would change fashion history. A tiny, seemingly insignificant little fixing that would provide strength at pressure points like pocket corners that would make all the difference to the durability of the clothing. Rivets.
The rivet, at least from a physics standpoint, is sort of taking forces that could be applied to areas that, like pockets or seams that have a lot of pressure and force applied to them, and sort of distributing it around its circular shape, and protecting the material, adding a sort of extra layer of reinforcement so that the clothing doesn't fall apart.
Jacob Davis, the tailor, had strong fabric purchased from Strauss and rivets, but he didn't have the money to buy the patent for his revolutionary idea. Levi Strauss was simply a businessman, albeit a successful one, but his role was pivotal. Firstly, he stocked this new blue fabric called Denim, and secondly, he had the means to invest in Davis's idea. He bought the patent in 1873, and history was made. Without Strauss, jeans may never have got off the ground.
It's quite fortuitous that these two people came together and realized a sort of hole in the market that enabled jeans to become a thing, right? It's not so often you'd think that, a tailor would get into business with the person who was essentially giving them the material to come up with a whole new thing. So it's actually quite lucky that they had this idea and they made it work.
The new invention was originally known as waist overalls. Back in the day, the garments came with the reassuring guarantee that the copper rivets wouldn't scratch or damage furniture when you sat down, and the promise of a new pair for free if the jeans were to rip. Such was the confidence in the new invention. In the early years, they didn't have belt loops, as seen in this vintage pair bought in 1917. There's only one back pocket and 3 front pockets, the smallest designed for a pocket watch. This pair were worn every day for 3 years, except on Sundays, by a miner called Homer Campbell. He patched and padded them for extra protection, but underneath all those patches, the original jeans were still intact. With stories like this, no wonder jeans were such a successful invention. We seem to have a never-ending appetite for jeans, though the basic concept has never changed.
It's not very often that you have an idea that will last an entire century and beyond. So they did something which was so right. Nobody's found a way to improve it in all that time.
This small factory makes 200 pairs of jeans a week. Every single pair is handmade by one of these highly skilled artisans, known here as Grand Masters. The emergence of niche brands and premium jeans is a modern phenomenon. But such is the size and breadth of the market, the spectrum between mass-produced and artisan luxury garments seems to get wider.
There's a lot of geekiness to jeans, just like there's geekiness to coffee. There's plantation denim, there's salvage denim, there's the warp and the weft, there's all sorts of nuance, and there's some great denim mills, and there's not some great denim mills, and people want to work with the best Japanese denim or the finest Italian denim, so it gets very geeky.
However much designers tweak and modify the various component parts of their products, the customer is relying on their new pair of jeans to fit and to be right for them.
There's great freedom of movement. I don't have to worry about carrying myself in a pair of jeans. The jeans do that for me.
I definitely feel comfortable. Like I feel like I'm myself and yet stylish. If there's figure-hugging ones, I can feel quite sexy. Or if they're just like my super relaxed ones, then I just feel at home.
In the late 19th century, there was no suggestion that the new denim blue workwear was in any way stylish. Yet Jacob Davis took the trouble to choose a contrasting rust color for the visible stitching on the garments, which complemented the copper-colored rivets. It distinguished them from rivals' copies and became something that is still important in generic jeans tailoring. Despite this nod to aesthetics, workwear design was fundamentally functional. Thanks to the strong cotton denim fabric, the target buyers did tough manual jobs, not only gold prospecting and mining, but they were ranch hands, railroad workers, and farmers. These working men weren't interested in fashion. They just wanted their clothing to last, and denim hit the mark.
It's incredibly durable, it's absorbent, and so it wicks away moisture from our bodies and keeps us cool, but is also breathable. And because it's just made out of cellulose plant fibers, it's relatively cheap and easy to produce.
But there was a problem with one key aspect of denim manufacturing. It was the color blue, thanks to indigo, which has been used as a cloth dye for at least the last 4,000 years. And color is important to us.
The question of how you colour clothing, of how you introduce dyes into your fabrics is one that goes back millennia. And one of the oldest ways of dyeing cloth blue was to use indigo. There are two ways of getting indigo. I mean, one is woad, which the ancient Britons daubed themselves in. The other thing is to use the indigo plant, which is native to the Orient and particularly in India.
The invention of jeans and their immediate popularity led to a massive increase in demand for indigo, which created the original and iconic blue denim color. Curiously, the color we now know as indigo was given its name by Sir Isaac Newton in the 17th century. He had identified the 7 colors in the visible spectrum. But for the purposes of identification, they all needed a name. Newton named the 2 new ones orange and indigo.
To me, indigo is the color which Isaac Newton made the name up for. It didn't used to exist until Isaac Newton started talking about rainbows. And he wanted it to match like musical scales. So he just added an extra one in and created indigo as a word.
Newton's inclusion of indigo is now being questioned. However, using a dark blue fabric for his new workwear was a clever move by Jacob Davis. It's a color that clearly resonates with people.
I think colour does have an effect on us, and I think that's I think it's a very subjective thing about colour as well, and there's certain colours that I think are universally understood. Red, for one, we know that it might mean danger, it might mean warmth, so we have a language for that. And I think the same goes for blue with coolness. And I think the word coolness associated with jeans has become just that. It's hip, it's the thing to do. And I think that's where we kind of zero in on the dark blue denim. We get it.
One of the earliest indigo producers was India, used in its culture like this, for example, in a custom dating back over 4,000 years. This family in Tamil Nadu, South India, still produce indigo dye using traditional methods. They cultivate the Indigofera tinctoria plant, which they harvest and then steep in large vats of water mixed with an alkaline, such as soda ash or potash. Surprisingly, the water turns green at first, but the natural blue will emerge in the process.
So indigo is a fascinating dye because it's one of the rare dyes that we can get from nature that's blue.
The liquid is physically stimulated by these workers, who add oxygen in the process to ferment the leaves, which releases indigo pigment as a sediment. They skim off and remove the scum, and then transfer the sediment to copper vats. It's boiled vigorously for a couple of hours, and then filtered through pieces of cloth. The resulting derivative in the form of a paste is the indigo dye, which is cut into cubes and dried, but it doesn't dissolve and must undergo a chemical reaction to dilute it.
Because indigo is not water soluble, it requires chemical processes to turn it into something that's useful to be added to a dye. And this produces waste products like sulfates and sulfites, and these are bad for life. If you get them into the rivers and so on, they kill off fish. They're also corrosive to pipes. And so this is sort of the eternal battle for dye producers, is to find a way of making our clothes the color we want them to be without damaging the environment.
There had to be a synthetic solution. It was German chemist Adolf von Baeyer who found it. In 1905, he was awarded a Nobel Prize for his groundbreaking work in deciphering the chemical structure of indigo. Von Bayer's work led him to invent a synthetic replacement for the precursor itself.
And it's the production of these chemical dyes pioneered in Germany, which enables the industrial scale of colouring, which produces now most of the jeans, most of the blue jeans that we wear.
Despite the change in dye from natural to synthetic, nobody noticed a difference in the color of their blue denim jeans. The target buyers of those early jeans did not disappoint. They bought this revolutionary new clothing, and expansion in manufacturing was on its way. The next step was to spread the word, widen the market, appeal to the masses. And that happened in several ways.
I think what's interesting about jeans is they were a workman's trouser, but then they became something much more than that. They were so good, they were so long-lasting, or whatever, that everybody started wearing them. Although they did become a bit of a social signal as well.
But the market didn't widen until Hollywood moved the goalposts. In the 1920s and 30s, movie directors started dressing their cowboy heroes in denim jeans. This gave jeans street cred and helped them to reach a much wider audience.
I think there's a particularly American story there, and that's about the American love of the frontier. It's about the American dream of manifest destiny, and the idea that all Americans, at least all white Americans, are, somehow pioneers.
By the 1950s, one of the most famous cowboys of them all, John Wayne, was thrilling audiences clad in a more flattering cut of the original working man's blue jeans. Wayne personified the macho Wild West dressed in denim. Now jeans appeal to the young, who wanted to show some individuality. But wearing jeans also became associated with a certain defiance against authority. Hollywood heartthrob James Dean exemplified teenage delinquency in the movie Rebel Without a Cause. He played the ultimate brooding rebel against authority. And of course, he was wearing blue denim jeans.
In the 50s, what you see is jeans being worn by film stars like James Dean and by singers like Elvis. And this is a sign of their rebellious streak. It's a sign of them as ordinary men with extraordinary talents. And it's a sign of youth. Everyone wants some of that. And so jeans become a symbol of youth, and then they become a symbol of everyone, of every man, and every woman too.
At the same time, the raucous sounds of rock and roll were breaking through. As Elvis Presley wiggled his hips in blue jeans, amplifying the sex appeal of jeans.
If you think about Elvis Presley, a time they were coming out of almost a repressed society into somebody wearing jeans, doing his moves. All of this is about rebellion. It's about the birth of something new. He's becoming a big star. Of course, everybody wants to emulate that. It's really sexy. What a seductive combination.
Despite their growing popularity in Hollywood and with America's youth, blue jeans were banned in certain places like restaurants, theaters, and schools. Even crooner and actor Bing Crosby was apparently refused entry to a smart hotel in Canada when he was dressed from top to toe, inappropriately, in denim. Some countries, like Russia, refused to import them. The authorities believed they represented freedom and democracy. As a result, ordinary Russians were desperate to get hold of a pair. European countries embraced them. American soldiers stationed in post-war Germany were seen off-duty wearing jeans. Enterprising clothing manufacturer Albert Safranek traded 6 bottles of booze with some American GIs for 6 pairs of jeans, which he set out to copy in his workshop. He imported denim from the States, and a European brand of jeans was born. Celebrity endorsement fuels the jeans market as much today as it did in the past. As companies develop their own interpretations of this legendary piece of clothing, nothing helps them more than a big star wearing their jeans, because their fans will want to copy them.
Wanting to emulate somebody you idolize is pretty much part of the human condition. We always aspire to, how did they get there? How do they do that? I want some of that reflected glory. I want to feel what they feel. I want to stand in their aura. And I think when it's something that is seemingly accessible, like if I wear those jeans, I will feel more like them, or I'll feel more positive. That is why we do that.
And royalty somehow brings a magic all of its own. Orders skyrocketed once a pair of black skinny jeans from the Little Welsh factory had been modeled by one of the most famous women in the world.
Suddenly Meghan Markle wears your jeans and you go, thank you, universe, that's super lucky. But it does change your company, because suddenly a lot more people in the world know that you exist. We didn't plan it, there wasn't a strategy. It was just a piece of luck.
For decades, we've taken female endorsement of jeans for granted, but it wasn't always so. Jeans played a crucial role in the battle for equality of the sexes. It began by women daring to wear their brothers' or husbands' jeans when they had menial, physical jobs to do, like washing the car or helping out on the ranch.
There's a real anxiety amongst some people about women wearing trousers, pretending to be men. That caused tremendous anxiety in the 19th century and into the 20th century. Women wearing jeans is making an even stronger point in some respect. And so again, it's about rebellion. It's about women showing that they're not going to be held back by conventional bourgeois norms.
It wasn't as though women elsewhere in the world weren't already wearing leg-covering garments. Pantaloons had been common across Europe and Asia for centuries. And even during the mid-1800s, Western women had started wearing a garment called bloomers, which were particularly practical for cycling and horse riding.
I mean, jeans is such a great invention because, as someone who's ridden horses all their life, I know how important it is to have thick trousers to protect your legs from the straps and so on. And jeans provide this layer of protection.
But for the women of America, wearing blue jeans as a practical solution for hard graft outdoors soon morphed into a fashion statement all of its own. Women were an untapped market, and designers and advertisers jumped to attention. Finally, manufacturers recognized a potential new clientele to exploit. In 1934, a working garment called Lady Levi's was launched. They were aimed at women on farms and ranches, but women were definitely not to be seen out in society in blue jeans, and wearing them didn't mean they were equal to men.
I think something like having your own pair of jeans was a signal that, we want equal rights. It's right at the forefront of that movement, clothes are politics, aren't they? They send out a particular message, and I think women driving for that behind that is also driving for their own freedom to express themselves the way they want to.
Women weren't the only sector of society to change the future of jeans. In the early days, when the burgeoning jeans industry was aimed at laborers, bibbed denim workwear or dungarees were worn by America's former slaves. Slavery had theoretically been abolished there only a few years before the invention of jeans. Many had become tenant farmers, known as sharecroppers, a practice that lasted way into the 20th century. Ironically, one of their principal crops was cotton, that fundamental element in the production of denim jeans. In the 1960s, when the American Civil Rights Movement took hold, male and female marchers wore dungarees to demonstrate how little had changed for African Americans since slavery had been abolished.
And in the 60s, it is used by some people in the civil rights movement in these dungarees to recall the plantation, to recall slavery, and to recall the fact that these were the clothes that were forced upon them.
Denim was worn by the enslaved, made to wear by their slave owners, because they were the ones working in the fields, picking the cotton, doing all the grunt, dirty work. And they were wearing them now to protest, to say, we were separate then and we're separate now, and they were making a very powerful political point.
It was another step in rendering jeans the garment of choice for everyone, a potent symbol of equality, of the sexes, of race, of wealth. The 60s also brought flower power and bell-bottoms to jeans. People went to town with their own designs, creating customized individual looks that reflected the chilled, psychedelic vibe of the time. Others played with bleaching when it became fashionable to wear much lighter blue denim, and the versatility of jeans has never faded.
Oh, I've done everything you can think of to jeans. I've ripped them, I've cut them off, I've added flares to them. When I was 12, I don't know why I did that. I've shredded them, I've turned them into a top.
Jeans, the clothing of the people, became a vehicle for self-expression, individualism, and creativity. and not just for humans to model.
I think I even, oh yeah, I think I made them so that they would fit on the dog. I used to like dressing up my mum's dogs.
In the 1970s, punks would tear their jeans at the knees, add safety pins and chains along with patches of worn and frayed denim in random places, making jeans look considerably older, tattier, and altogether rougher, and bringing a bit of anarchy to the party.
It's a rebellion against bourgeois conventionality. It's a rebellion against neatly pressed trousers, if you like.
It might have shocked Strauss and Davis that their innocuous invention would become symbolic of a subversive underground culture, with young people challenging authority and wanting to exert their independence. And their invention, specifically designed not to rip, was defiantly ripped.
I think what makes people want to rebel is about saying, I'm an individual, this is my identity, and I'm going to put my stamp on it. And when we tend to see the biggest surge in rebellion is when we are teenagers, when we are separating from parents and we are wanting to hang out with our peers, and everything to do with following the rules and being good becomes, I want to throw that out and I want to do me. And to tear something up is to say, you know, I am being rebellious. This is about what I want, and, you know, 2 fingers up to society, parents, work, whatever it is.
In the 1980s, the marketing people were at it again, on a mission to boost sales. This TV commercial stood out for its brazen sexiness, casting a good-looking model stripping down to his underwear in a laundrette. The 1950s production design, perhaps a nod back to the heyday of all-American jeans. The commercial was so successful, it seems it was taken off air because the makers couldn't keep up with demand. Despite the message in the commercial, there's a question about how often to wash your jeans.
I personally would have tried on many pairs to get the correct fitting jeans, and if I wear them too much, they kind of go out of shape. And so washing them for me is kind of like hitting the reset button.
There's also a persistent trend to shrink to fit. The theory is that if you wash your jeans and put them on while they're wet, they will shrink to fit your body more snugly. And jeans have seen another idea, that you can rid your dirty jeans of unpleasant odors by freezing them for a few days to literally kill the smell.
The smells that come from your dirty jeans are from bacteria breaking down all the goodness that you've gotten into the jeans. And freezing them, yes, it temporarily sort of freezes the bacteria from doing what they were doing, but as soon as they warm up again, the smell will come back. I mean, if you want to get rid of the bacteria for good, then you need to either heat up the jeans. You could cook your jeans maybe, but then they'll probably become a bit charred and not so optimal either.
Jeans have survived periods of huge change. Revolutions, world wars, the creation of other great inventions, and fashions.
They just seem to have this sort of cultural points that they would sort of become hugely relevant again. And obviously they've never really gone away, but there are these sort of like landmark moments where sort of jeans have captivated the look of a decade.
Where does the jeans industry go from here? There are big questions over sustainability and the impact jeans manufacturing is having on the planet.
I think, you know, the way jeans are made has costs to nature, to the natural world, to the environment. And I think moving forward, you know, it'd be important for companies to think about sustainable materials and how things can be recycled, made, produced, because this is a fashion that's not going away anytime soon. So if we can think about sustainability, that's going to matter much more moving forward.
Modern manufacturers must tackle the issues to maintain the generally wholesome image of jeans as a garment for the people.
You know, making a pair of jeans can be an ugly process. You know, there's a lot of dyes, there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of water.
Jeans manufacturing not only uses harmful chemicals, but there is a huge amount of water and washing in the production process.
Women tend to prefer a bit more elasticity in the jean. The wash is just to help get the stiffness out of the denim.
Most manufacturers wash denim several times for a number of reasons, not just softening them up to make them more acceptable to the consumer. In this Indian factory, piles of jeans are loaded into industrial-scale washing machines. Soap powder is added to remove residual dye and dust. Thousands of liters of water are used in this single process in one factory. Plus, denim is known for shrinking, so it's washed to prevent customers buying a garment that doesn't fit once they've washed it themselves.
The best thing you can do for the environment is not wash jeans. You know, 80% of the impact, you know, comes from you and I washing and ironing our jeans. But let's be honest, like, we're a maker, we're part of the problem, but it's our intention to make jeans with the lowest amount of energy, the lowest amount of water, the lowest amount of chemicals. The blue jean can be very green, and I think that's the future.
This company in Switzerland is making compostable jeans, inspired to create functional and biodegradable clothes for their factory workers. They use a cotton alternative, flax, which requires much less water to grow. The linen from flax is combined with hemp, another plant-based fiber, to make a robust, tear-proof denim. The fabric is dyed using sustainable methods, and the garments are entirely manufactured in Europe. They don't use rivets, and the only thing that doesn't biodegrade is the metal buttons, but they can be kept and reused. Composting takes just a few months. Jeans can also be successfully recycled.
I like making recycled things. That's actually a great thing about jeans, is that they recycle into all kinds of different clothing very easily.
But for denim that is not going to be repurposed into another piece of clothing, this recycling program in the United States shreds millions of unwanted denim garments and compacts them into bales for use in home insulation. Then it's down to forward-thinking builders to use it in construction. The global success and enduring appeal of jeans has been immeasurable. Jeans are the great leveler, the clothing of the people, the clothing of our time, and the clothing of choice for many for the last 150 years.
Jeans are a great invention because they're the great democratic clothing. Everyone can wear them. Everyone does wear them.
Intended to clothe gold diggers in durable workwear that wouldn't rip at the pockets or anywhere else, they've turned into a fashion statement like no other. A globally popular, ordinary piece of clothing that it's impossible to imagine the world's wardrobes without.
I think jeans are an amazing invention because they look great, they're sturdy, they can last a very long time, and they're almost peerless when it comes to fashion.
Image makers might have it as an all-American story, but in fact, jeans are the product of European innovation that provided the raw material for a once obscure American tailor to craft a winner, and his supplier who had the means to make it happen.
Over millions of years, evolution has developed the burdock. Its seed is large and heavy. Insects or winds cannot spread it.
Evolution is brilliant and life finds a way. they developed the spikes, essentially, on the burdock plant. And that meant that when animals pass by, furry animals like a deer or a dog or something, that it will then hook on to that animal and get carried by that animal far away, eventually dropping off, and then that's where that seed can grow. So an ingenious solution to a tricky problem.
1941, war rages in Europe, but not in neutral Switzerland. Here lives a man, an engineer, who goes hunting together with his dog, not suspecting that he's about to make an historical discovery, or so the legend goes.
The invention of the hook and loop fastener is a fascinating bit of serendipity. Its inventor, George de Mistral, was just out walking his dog one day, and they walked past some burdock. And when he got home, he noticed that both he and his dog were absolutely covered in these tiny little seed pods from the burdock. And he wondered, how has that stuff stayed attached to me and my dog? You know, it's been defying gravity, dog's been rolling around on the floor, and this stuff is still attached. And so he decided in that moment to take a look at this stuff under the microscope.
What does the inventor see? Incredible potential, unexpected possibilities, thanks to the hook and loop fastener.
So hook and loops, I suppose, anything that you just need to rip off quickly and then put back on again.
It's impossible to imagine everyday life without the hook and loop fastener. It's everywhere, so common that we hardly notice it.
So it really has just permeated every single corner of our lives.
For example, blood pressure monitors.
The hook and loop fastener is perfect for this because it spreads the force out over quite a big area and it doesn't pull undone easily.
Also, the lives of animals have changed.
The hook and loop provides so much more scope for securing and fastening things than most of us really realise.
People who can't use buttons are dependent on the hook and loop fastener. And, thanks to it, free. In 1941, there is still a long way to go until today's hook and loop fasteners. The inventor doesn't know of any materials he could reproduce the plant with.
The actual burdock kind of model of the hooking onto the fabric couldn't have been done without the materials that they were using in the 1940s.
No raw material that is available in Switzerland seems to be suitable for hook and loop fasteners. De Mistral starts to search all over Europe, but he still has no chance.
Even if somebody had the idea of the hook and loop fastener earlier, it still wouldn't have been possible to actually make it because you need the materials that the hook and loop fastener is made of.
What de Mistral is looking for, he can't yet find. It's only available to a small group of people in the United States. A material discovered in the laboratory of a chemical factory in the state of Delaware.
They were run almost like a research institute for a university. And although they had very targeted projects, one thing they had was the Friday afternoon experiment. And Friday afternoon experiments have become kind of legendary amongst researchers. Is that Friday afternoon is a time when maybe you can try out something just different, just to see if it'll work.
On a Friday in 1935, in an experiment of this kind, researchers created a material that is still used in the fashion and textile industry today: nylon.
The American military had access to it. Anything that was used for the war effort was massively controlled using rationing. And one of the things that you couldn't get in the UK in this period was nylon. So you hear stories, for example, about American soldiers being really popular with British girls because they would bring them nylon stockings from the States.
Chemical silk, for example, for parachutes. Cheap to produce and very durable. In wartime, nylon is invaluable.
He got these viscous glutes, these strange honey-like materials. These were polymers. Polymers, long-chain materials, which in fact, if you removed the solvent, you could draw them out into long, thin fibers. This was the beginning of a material called nylon.
The war is over. For more than 6 years, many goods used by the military were hardly available. Now the time for rationing is over, and nylon products are aggressively promoted.
Brush 'em up and brush 'em down. Keep your choppers clean and sound. Help your teeth to stay around until you're old and gray.
Nylon quickly becomes indispensable, especially for the bristles of toothbrushes. Then comes the breakthrough as an important component of ladies' tights.
Stockings. But watch. On the leg, they stretch better to fit better.
Nylon tights became the best thing. And very, very rapidly, this really tough, really strong, but very cheap material had spread to clothes, to parachutes. Nylon was truly a revolutionary wonder material.
Lyon, France, the late 1940s. The first place in Europe where nylon is processed on a large scale.
A lot of the big fashion houses in Paris were still running, and in order to keep running, they had to have access to fabric. And so the Lyon industry was supported by the occupying forces and to keep the Parisian couture industry running. So in the 1940s, if you are looking for a center of industry that's involved with textiles and weaving and technology, Lyon is one of the few places that's still really functioning as a center for textile production.
Designers and manufacturers from all over the world come to Lyon to work, including Georges de Mestral. He's still looking for a way to reproduce the burdock and dog fur effect.
Georges de Mestral talked to some of the weavers there, obviously whose craft is creating fabric and textile. And he worked very specifically with a colleague, and they tried first to develop a hook and loop fastener in cotton. And they had several attempts at this before deciding that cotton was not strong enough, so it couldn't sustain the hook and loop.
With cotton, the inventor can indeed produce a hook and loop fastener, but the hooks don't stay in shape as they're too soft. Experiments are carried out on the looms day and night. Also with nylon. When the chemical silk is heated, this brings the breakthrough.
The key thing with nylon is that it turns out that it's the temperature at which you need to heat it to soften it is not all that high. But on the other hand, when it cools down, it remains really quite stiff. And so what this meant was that you could warm things up in order to be able to shape your little hooks. But once you cooled them down, you actually had quite a robust link. And of course, you don't just make one. If you make 10,000, then the whole material holds together in an extraordinary way.
Nylon enables the production of the first hook and loop fastener. That material, which was so important in the war. Many important innovations of the 20th century date back to this time. Walkie-talkies or ready-made food, as it is available in the supermarkets today. The hook and loop fastener dates from that time, but has nothing to do with the engine of invention, war. In 1951, Georges de Mestral applied for his patent in Europe. 7 years later, also in the USA.
When you look at the patent, it's not just for the hook and loop fastener, it's for the machines that make the hook and loop fastener as well. So it's really important to him not just to have a prototype, but to have some way of manufacturing it as well.
The patent is divided into two parts. Part 1 explains how to make the loops from nylon. The other part, how machines cut these loops to form the hooks and the other side of the hook and loop fastener. The 1950s begin. Rock and roll is the soundtrack of the first post-war generation. It's a wild time, with the youths questioning everything that is known. a shortage of raw material and their rationing are no longer an issue. The inventor grants licenses all over the world for his product, which he himself calls Velcro, a composition from the French word velours for velvet and crochet for hooks.
But actually now, lots of different companies are able to make hook and loop fasteners.
The American licensee secures the product name. To this day, there are countries in which the Velcro fastener is mainly known by this term. But companies all over the world produce hook and loop fasteners.
It's amazing how the hook and loop fastener has really become so ubiquitous. I think probably the most recent one I used was to tie up the USB cable that I use to charge my phone.
Serial production of hook and loop fasteners begins in the United States. But the potential customers are not yet aware of this. Wanted a marketing campaign to sell the hook and loop fastener. Easier and faster, and more durable than buttons, cords, or the zipper. That's the manufacturer's message.
When they got the American patent, nobody knew anything about it. And what they did was they got a journalist to write about the hook and loop fastener. And she called it the zipperless zipper, which I think is this great phrase, and said that it was going to revolutionize everything about clothing and make life much more convenient.
At that time, the author Sylvia Porter reached up to 40 million readers with her columns. Her article makes the hook and loop fastener famous overnight.
This marketing campaign that used the media, and that was a very clever thing to do because he's getting people involved in it from the kind of fashion industry to talk about how it will be revolutionary in that, and then at the same time thinking about how it might be helpful in everyday life.
A short time later, the technology came into the view of a powerful governmental organization in the United States, NASA. During the Cold War, the Americans want to constantly improve their space technology, to be one step ahead of the Soviet Union and win the race to the moon. NASA is looking for ways to make the lives of astronauts in weightlessness more comfortable. The hook and loop fastener becomes an important milestone for the American space program. For example, as part of Neil Armstrong's spacesuit.
Hook and loop fasteners are able to be used in very extreme environments. They maintain their shape and therefore their ability to stick, up to very high temperatures and even to incredibly low temperatures. And actually, that's really important in space. There's a safety aspect as well with hook and loop fasteners. The failure rate of things just as simple as buttons is actually way, way higher than hook and loop fasteners. And that's not just you or me having a wardrobe malfunction. That's actually something that NASA had to worry about.
The instructions in the rocket and in the lunar module pinned to the wall in weightlessness with hook and loop fasteners. In the command unit of the Apollo 11 mission alone, more than 2,000 square centimeters of different versions are in use. Flying to the moon, a specially made, fireproof hook and loop fastener. Without it, maybe we would never have taken a walk up there.
The hook and loop fastener has even been to the moon in loads of different forms. The astronauts, while they were flying there, would use it to attach instructions to the panels that they were using to control the spaceship. And then when they got outside, their spacesuits, all the pockets would close with the hook and loop fastener. Their samples, when they collected the rocks, you'd seal that up with the hook and loop fastener.
Hook and loop fasteners hold together even stronger when subjected to vibrations and don't become loose, like bows, for example.
The only disadvantage they found was that some of them, if they were on, for example, a lower part of a spacesuit or even in some places on the moon buggy, then the hook and loop fastener could get clogged up with moon dust.
Dust contamination, a problem that hook and loop fasteners still have in today's space travel.
Of course, there's lots of human skin cells shed, and that makes most of the dust. The dust floats around all over in the air, of course, in space. And then when you do rip off some of the, whatever it is you want from your hook and loops on the wall, you get a bit of a sprinkling of dust that comes off that. Now, you could argue perhaps we should have cleaned the dust out ourselves beforehand. It just sort of somehow attracts itself to the hook and loops. But that's the same in shoes, of course. You take off your muddy shoes and the mud stays in the hook and loops. But nonetheless, you can clean it and then you can reuse it. Brilliant.
The hook and loop fastener significantly supports humankind in landing on the moon. At the same time, the inventor becomes somewhat forgotten.
Most people don't know the real story behind the invention of the hook and loop fastener. In fact, they think it was NASA that invented it. And the main reason for that is it was widely publicized as being all over the Apollo 11 mission.
Even today, it's impossible to imagine space travel without the hook and loop fastener. All astronauts associate a lot with it. In 1991, Helen Sharman is the first woman in space who is not from the United States or Russia.
Helen Sharman is a very famous British astronaut. I remember watching her on television when I was a child, when she was on the Mir space station. She's amazing.
An agreement was made between the Soviet Space Agency and a British company to send somebody from Britain, and I applied for that job.
The chemist goes through months of training. And afterwards, researches on the Russian space station Mir.
On the Mir station, on the walls, we had great big patches of the loops part of the hook and loop fastening. And almost wherever there was a spare section, there would be, it's like a wallpaper, actually, of the soft bit of the hook and loops. And then everything we had was either in a packet with a tiny little section. It needed to be a small square of the hooks. But that was sewn on or stuck onto the actual packet or to the actual tool that we had. And then whenever we wanted to secure something, I mean, I could hardly really say put it down because there was no down, but when we wanted to secure something, we could just put it on the wall.
A peanut butter and marmalade sandwich. This only works in weightlessness, if you can position the various jars. So in space, both the jar and the storage area have hook and loop fasteners. Most of these technical devices are attached to the walls with hook and loop fasteners. Today, they're safer, more reliable, and faster on board the International Space Station than their forebears from the 1960s.
A lot of the astronauts nowadays have the loop part perhaps on their trousers, on their thighs. And so if you want to stick something to your clothing, you can use hook and loop fasteners for that as well.
Here on Earth, the fireproof hook and loop fasteners used by space travelers are found, for example, in the suits of racing drivers and by firefighters, whose heroic efforts would be even more difficult without them.
Hook and loop fasteners are really important in the context of fire as well. So firefighters, they often have hook and loop fasteners all over their jackets. So it's really obviously important that they be fire resistant.
Most everyday hook and loop fasteners do not have to be fireproof, even though they are now produced for lots of extreme situations. Hook and loop fasteners and also adhesive fasteners for diapers. In this German factory, thousands are produced every day. But many hook and loop fasteners aren't seen by us at all, even though they are always close by. They secure the seat covers on aeroplanes and are in many more places where hardly anyone would suspect them.
Actually being used in all manner of places like cars and planes to stick these parts of very different materials together.
And the technology that was developed in the middle of the 20th century still works. Here, the nylon threads are processed.
in clothing and textiles, nylon is still the second most used textile after cotton in the industry.
Various tricks help to improve modern hook and loop fasteners, but the basis remains. Half of the loops are cut through. This is how the hooks are created, and thanks to the nylon, they are so strong that they hold the loops until you remove them at the correct angle. An eternal classic. But new times need new connections. Even stronger. How could the ingenious hook and loop fastener be developed even further? Once again, it is the greatest of all inventors that has a decisive influence on the development Mother Nature. Mushrooms. Their shape is the basis for a completely new type of hook and loop fastener. Hard to open, enormously secure.
The mushroom hook and loop fastener, just by having a different shape, it makes a much stronger bond than the ones that we're used to in our, say, clothing. Obviously, the ones in clothing have a very specific need to kind of on and off very easily. The mushroom shape, with that strength, allows it to be very versatile in just sticking lots of things together and ensuring that it doesn't come off.
Every day, billions of people move around in means of transport in which the hook and loop fasteners are installed. In the wall coverings of railways and airplanes, and on buses, the ceilings and cover of cars. All this fastened with mushroom hook and loop fasteners.
The hook and loop provides so much more scope for securing and fastening things than most of us really realize.
Mushroom hook and loop fasteners are also changing the production processes for local and long-distance transport.
At the time when buses were still clad with rivets, screws and pipes, it took 3 workers a total of about 8 hours to clad a bus on the inside. Today, with modern hook and loop fasteners, mushroom in mushroom technology, 2 workers need just 30 minutes and a complete bus has been clad on the inside. This reduces the costs for the industry enormously.
Here, it's not just about costs, it's about human lives. 2/3 of the Earth's surface is covered by water, an untamable element. The sea level is rising due to climate change. Scientists say that flooding will be even more frequent in the future. That's when the hook and loop fastener could be an aid to protection.
So actually having a hook and loop fastener that is waterproof means it's very easy to open and close, put more sand in, etc., but also to connect the bags together to make a much stronger wall, but also makes it a lot easier for people to use. So waterproof hook and loop fasteners, there's real potential there.
Experiments are underway with waterproof hook and loop fasteners. Thanks to them, sandbags can be closed faster and made refillable. Firmly connected, a bulwark against the water. How a hook and loop fastener sticks to fabric is logical. It's usually sewn on. But what about hard surfaces? There are high-tech adhesives for this purpose that can attach the hook and loop fastener to any surface and which hold in tropical heat and Arctic cold.
These are special requirements or things to consider, for example, with regard to resistance to aging. Long term, how long should it be in use? Weather resistance. What climatic conditions is this compound exposed to? The temperature range is very important. Do I work in an environment where the temperature is 50 degrees, 100 degrees, 150 degrees in the plus range? Or do I go into Arctic temperatures, minus 50, minus 60, minus 70 degrees? And that is very important for the design of the adhesives.
Where there is bonding, there are residues. Welding or soldering can damage material. Cables are impractical and not always strong. Our world is so fast and continues to accelerate. Industry is looking for a new technology to connect things, those things that connect us. Maybe a technology inspired by the hook and loop fastener.
Oh, that's interesting.
Perhaps it was glued. Whatever it is, it's very strong.
This is really weird. It's two little bits of copper and they seem like they're welded together or something, but actually in that gap, apparently there's a hook and loop fastener. And it's... Can't get them apart.
The connection between these two copper plates can't be seen under a conventional microscope. Huge metal hook and loop fasteners that can carry enormous loads. This is what scientists at various universities are researching. This is about something else, an abstract further development of the idea of the hook and loop fastener. It is so strong that a beer crate can be lifted without any problem, and even more.
In reality, the piece of metal that we have joined together is capable of lifting an entire elephant.
The secret is a mixture of chemistry and electricity, the so-called galvanic process. Electric shocks are put through a bath of various chemicals. As a result, tiny hairs grow on the material, which fit together like hook and loops in hook and loop fasteners. The individual tiny hairs have a diameter of between 30 nanometers and 2 micrometers. 1,000 microns is 1 millimeter, very small.
What you have here is a method of fastening things together that doesn't require any heating of the two surfaces or deforming them in any way other than by creating the hooks and loops. So it's a very precision technique for joining things together, but it can also therefore be used for things like microchips, where your surfaces are very sensitive and you don't want to be manipulating them in any way that you don't have to.
German students discovered the similarity to the hook and loop fastener and filed a patent, then founded a company. With modern technology, every step in the process is monitored. Under normal microscopes, the tiny hairs are hardly visible. You need an electron scanning microscope. Then you can see how they grow on the metal, like a lawn, how the parts fit together, like the two sides of a hook and loop fastener. In microchip technology, the difficult work with heat should become unnecessary if conductive parts can be easily stacked with a micro hook and loop fastener. But one thing this very small hook and loop fastener made of metal is not suitable for is unfastening. The connection should be able to withstand a load of over 6 tons. This can only be checked under laboratory conditions. The two copper plates are connected with the micro hook and loop fastener. If the technology is to be built into smartphones and even more sensitive devices, it must be absolutely secure. And it is. Except, of course, when an elephant weighing several tons steps on the phone.
This isn't, what you'd normally think of when you think about attaching your clothes or, doing up your shoes. But actually, the same principle can be applied to all kinds of different materials, even something like this.
The most successful bionic invention is being developed further. The young man has adhesive foils in his hands that do not adhere to every surface. And again, nature is the source of inspiration. The gecko's feet, which provide support on steep walls, but come off without leaving any residue.
What they have on those hands is just thousands of tiny, tiny little hairs. That gives a really big surface area that it's able to bring in contact, almost atomically close to the wall. What's happening is these very weak interactions known as van der Waals forces. They're not incredibly strong, but because you've got so many of these little hairs, it all adds up. And that's how something as big as a gecko is able to, through atomic forces, stick to a wall.
A human is no problem for this bionic technology, which would probably never have been possible without hook and loop fastener. Georges de Mestral's idea it lives on in places and objects which he himself probably could not imagine. A triumph, but one which has not taken place in every area. The view into another world, haute couture. On the catwalks, for example, at the big fashion shows in Paris or Milan, the hook and loop fastener still plays a smaller role than in people's everyday lives. Most of the time, it's invisible. The hook and loop fastener and the fashion industry, the relationship has always been complicated. In the 1960s, the world sees how practical the invention is. At first, many designers find the futuristic closure exciting.
When it was first invented and kind of just after it, it had this real kind of moment in fashion in the 1960s. So you have designers like Paco Rabanne, Pierre Cardin, who are working with new materials and new techniques, and the hook and loop fastener is a big part of that.
The Apollo program and everything that has to do with it is a popular topic in schools. Children and teenagers are especially fascinated by everything to do with the moon landing. The whole world is talking about Apollo, rockets, and the heroes on the moon.
I grew up with this idea that big things really are possible.
The famous photo of Neil Armstrong on the moon. The hook and loop fastener strips on the oxygen tanks are clearly visible. No physics class takes place without rocket science. This enthusiasm of entire generations also finds its way into fashion.
Space was fashionable. Space exploration was interesting. It was what was going on in the world, and the technologies that are associated with that were also interesting and fashionable. We've talked about like the use of plastics in fashion. The use of the hook and loop fastener is similar. It's this kind of new and exciting technique.
The moon trip as the best possible marketing campaign.
The special thing about the moon landing is the immense challenge that it posed back in that time, in the 60s, when technology was not so advanced as it is today. And yet that challenge was relished, that challenge was overcome, and that challenge inspired the world, and it was witnessed by the world.
Now look at fashion shows shortly after 1969. You would expect the hook and loop fastener to be visible everywhere, but one hardly sees it. The reason is actually quite obvious. It's enormously practical. From the designer's point of view, however, not particularly chic. This is also because of the familiar sound it makes.
When you open it, the hook and loop fastener makes a really specific noise when it comes undone. And you know, maybe on children's clothing, that's fine, and you don't notice it. But if you are trying to take your clothing on and off in a more formal setting, like you're undoing a jacket at a formal event, and all you can hear is rip down as you undo the hook and loop fastener, that's maybe not so nice. It might be considered to be spoiling the moment.
Over the years, the hook and loop fastener has conquered its place in the fashion world, secretly.
Now, it's moved to a much more utility role rather than a kind of object of design in its own right. You might not see it, but it is there. It's particularly there in kind of collections that are maybe more sportswear orientated. But normally, I think you see it's used as a fastener, and therefore, it's the purpose of a fastener is that it's not seen. It has a practical function.
A prominent exception is the American musician Kanye West. A trademark of his sporty fashion collections are the oversized hook and loop fasteners. His vests are made mainly of them. But recently, the hook and loop fastener has had another image problem. Nylon enjoys an increasingly bad reputation. Chemical silk is no different from plastic, a good reason for discussion in times of climate change.
But nylon is, of course, a plastic, and it's not recyclable. And we're trying to cut down the usage on single-use plastics, and so that means an issue for the hook and loop fastener. How are we going to do that, but do things sustainably?
Alternative materials are still often more expensive. But as a plastic, even the classic hook and loop fastener is facing uncomfortable times. Sometimes it remains indispensable. After all, what counts in space travel is also relevant on Earth in the 21st century. Modern hook and loop fasteners on clothing can be closed and undone up to 10,000 times before they wear out. It is precisely this durability that makes the hook and loop fastener the ideal tool in perhaps its most important areas of application. Some medical treatments would not be possible at all without this invention. Hook and loop fasteners are part of growing up. Children whose motor skills are not yet developed enough to tie bows. Their solution is called the hook and loop fastener.
For children, that's what the hook and loop fastener gives them. If they can take their own clothes off or put their own shoes on, it helps them to feel like they're in control of what's going on. And they go through a stage where they're very independent at that age. And all they want to do is to be able to do everything for themselves. So this is a crucial part of that independence.
Everything in different sizes that needs to be fastened.
If you think about a neck brace, the way that's held on is with the hook and loop fastener. When your doctor puts the blood pressure cuff around your arm to measure your blood pressure, again, hook and loop fastener. And it's a perfect technology for these applications, both because it's very, very difficult to remove, so it stays in place where you put it. And it's also very flexible in terms of size, so it doesn't matter how big your arm is, you can basically use the same blood pressure cuff for almost everybody.
People with disabilities are dependent on the hook and loop fastener. For some, it's the only way to make taking part possible.
Hook and loop fasteners can be really useful, particularly in clothing. If we're using things like zippers or buttons, that necessarily needs two hands. They're quite complicated to operate. A hook and loop fastener, so simple. You can do with one hand or even no hands, because as long as you can press it up against one another, you've formed a seal. And so that's actually really useful for people with disabilities who maybe don't have use of both hands or don't have two hands anymore.
There are many disabilities or paralyses that prevent people from using both hands at the same time. Just tying a bow or closing buttons is almost impossible. People who are missing limbs are particularly dependent on the hook and loop fastener. Gerd Schoenfelder, age 19, lost his right arm and 4 fingers of his left hand in a train accident. To enable him to grip, a toe is later sewn onto his hand. Nevertheless, he's one of the most successful athletes in the world. Schoenfelder won 16 gold medals as a skier at the Paralympics between 1992 and 2010. He uses the hook and loop fastener daily, be it on clothes, to tie his skis together, or for his hobbies. Golf, for example. Sport was the way to rehabilitation for the German. But how exactly can a one-armed man with only one original finger play golf? A medical miracle. No, just the hook and loop fastener. Schoenfelder has made a wristband that makes it possible for him to practice almost any kind of stroke sport. There are many stories like his. Without hook and loop fasteners, far fewer would have a happy ending.
Actually, a very simple band with a flap with a hook and loop fastener function, where you can simply pull it tight. Very stable. Wide so that it also holds well, and above all, also with the teeth. Quite an important thing with a one-armed person. The teeth have to replace the second hand, without also hurting your teeth. In itself, very simple.
A very good golf handicap, thanks to the hook and loop fastener. And the special backhand stroke technique. The hook and loop fastener wristband can be used for almost every stroke sport. People like Gerhard Schoenfelder need the hook and loop fastener. Not only in sports, but in almost every situation in life.
After I get up, I put on my watch, and it works with hook and loop fasteners too. I slip into it, similar to my bracelet when I play golf, put it like this. Once again, my teeth are used, but then the watch is on, and holds very well. You can also adjust it in width. In winter, you can wear it over your jacket if you need the watch all the time, so it's a great thing. Or, of course, sneakers with hook and loop fasteners. You also do a lot with hook and loop fasteners with ski boots.
Inclusion, the participation of people with disabilities in normal life. An invention of nature, making participation possible, and even more. Human leisure time. Here too, the hook and loop fastener has long had its place. At any temperature, in every element. Especially popular, catch and throw with the hook and loop fastener disc. $1 million game idea.
You might have also seen those, you can get those big walls. And if you wear a hook and loop fastener suit, you kind of do a jump, maybe flip upside down and stick to a wall. So there's lots of fun these things you can do.
And how about a little bit of comedy? In this sketch, these Australian comedians live in a world completely made of hook and loop fasteners.
Maybe not sport. Maybe that's not a good idea. Dancing. Dancing, all right, dancing. Go for it. Oh. That's good. That looks fun.
But what would a world without hook and loop fastener look like? Hard to imagine. It would probably be dominated by closure systems based on buttons, bows, and magnets. For space travel, we would have thought of another possibility. Whether independence and participation would be as possible as it is without hook and loop fasteners, that remains questionable.
So it's really difficult to think what would the world be like without it, because it's so much a part of our everyday life. So you don't think of this maybe, but if you've ever used an umbrella, then the little bit that ties your umbrella up when you're not using it is almost always a hook and loop fastener on it. So it has become very much a part of everyday products, maybe without us even realizing it.
And what does the future hold when plastic gradually disappears from our everyday lives? Will it be a world without nylon? A world without the hook and loop fastener?
I think that it will exist in some form in 100 to 150 years' time because it fulfills such a useful function to us. It's so much a part of our everyday life that we won't be able to get away from it.
The first steps towards the future have already been taken. Tiny little hook and loop fasteners already exist. Perhaps they will become even smaller or made of living, organic material. Self-regenerating. Forms which we are experimenting with and which we can hardly imagine.
So maybe hook and loop fasteners will be made out of other materials, and materials that we need to invent to be more environmentally conscious.
A plant and an inquisitive mind, that's where it all began. It has made life more practical. It makes us stronger, faster. It opens up the world and space.
The time was right. We had all these new technologies, we had these new materials.
It's such an important part of our everyday life, and yet we totally take it for granted.
I'd like to think that we are sufficiently inventive as a species that we would have found a solution to the problem, but it would look very different, I suspect.
It spreads joy, stays strong when it gets serious, provides protection. Georges de Mestral lived until 1990 and applied for many more patents before and after the hook and loop fastener.
But what's really interesting about him is that he actually invented lots of things and not just the hook and loop fastener. So in his New York Times obituary, his wife is quoted as saying one of the best things he made was an asparagus peeler. And this was apparently a really good seller, the asparagus peeler, when he invented it. It was really popular, but nobody remembers him for that now.
But his idea, after that hunting trip in 1941, when the burdock bothered him, is one of the greatest inventions based on nature.